On July 25th, 2015, we learned that my mom had developed a subdermal hematoma during her stem cell transplant hospitalization that would require her to have a craniotomy. I'm going to read a passage from this moment in my book, Losing Linda May, a Cancer Caregiving Memoir, because I think it underscores how it feels when something unexpected happens. Dad approaches Mom. He clutches the rail of the bed and sobs. Leisha and I stand beside him, rubbing his back. The pigmentation of Mom's skin has a bluish tint. There are dark circles around her sunken eyes. Her jowls sag. I remember to breathe. Things were going too smoothly. We naively believed that loss of appetite and leg weakness were going to be the worst side effects Mom would experience as a result of an extremely aggressive form of cancer treatment. We deluded ourselves with too much optimism. Something had to go wrong, and it did. In the days leading to this moment, there wasn't a lot of evidence to suggest that this was on the horizon. In fact, when my sister and I were getting ready at the hotel in the morning before going to the hospital, we were in really good spirits. We had a good night of sleep, and it felt like it was just going to be another par for the course day. This just shows how the twist of fate can happen when you're going through cancer treatment or when you're caring for someone who is going through cancer treatment. Things can turn on a dime, and you just have no idea what's coming next. Unfortunately, there's no way to make a contingency plan for every complication that could arise during cancer treatment. It's just impossible. There's just too many pathways that could branch in any different direction that you just can't foresee what's coming next. And you have to recognize that the body is being put through so much turmoil as all these chemotherapy agents and drugs and even the hospital setting with the lack of sleep and the weird conditions and the disruptions during the day, it's all compiling and just adding more stress and strain to the body that it's basically a pressure cooker, and it's almost inevitable that something is not going to go right. And in those moments when things go wrong, you're confronted with the reality of these attempts to try to attain this permanent remission and how much damage, at least temporarily, is being done to the body in order to achieve it. And so it should come as no surprise when something like a subdermal hematoma develops due to the fact that my mom's platelet levels got to such a low point that it was so easy for the blood to start pooling in this exposed part of her brain from prior treatments that had left her vulnerable. But it always does come as a surprise because even the most pessimistic person and the most anxiety-prone person is still holding on to enough optimism as they're going through treatment to believe that they'll make it through okay and unscathed. And that's what that passage was highlighting and how I was feeling in that moment as I was realizing that we were heading down a pathway that was no longer the straightforward one. We were on some other detour headed to a destination that I didn't know if it was the same as the one that we set out to reach when my mom was hospitalized for her stem cell transplant. Even worse, I didn't know if my mom would make it out of the hospital alive. The reason why the stakes were so much higher was because of the toll that had been taken on my mom's blood cells due to the high-dose chemotherapy. She was running on empty. She had no systems to repair herself because all of her white blood cells, her red blood cells, her platelets, they were all depleted. That's why the neurosurgeon said that they had to wait to do the craniotomy. If they would have drained the blood from the hematoma, it would have just rushed right back in because she had no platelets to start kicking in the clotting mechanisms, and the brain wouldn't have been able to spring back in enough time to refill the space before more blood didn't rush in. The stem cells that had been infused days prior just hadn't had enough time yet to start regenerating all the cells that had been nuked. I'm going to share some charts from my stem cell transplant that really visualize the impact that the high-dose chemotherapy has on blood cell counts. I was hospitalized for my autologous stem cell transplant on July 25th, 2022, exactly 3 years ago today, and I began receiving the high-dose chemotherapy that evening. It wrapped up on July 30th, and I received my stem cell transplant on August 1st. So keep those dates in mind as you look at these charts. Also, when you look at these charts, know that the green band is all normal ranges. Anything below or above is considered abnormal. This is the impact on my white blood cell count. So you see at the very beginning, it was actually very elevated just due to the drugs that I was injecting ahead of the stem cell transplant harvesting. So it's kind of carrying over at that point where I actually had an abundance of white blood cells. But you see as I'm going through the chemotherapy that it starts plummeting. And it keeps going in that direction until it hits rock bottom around Sunday, August 7th. And by rock bottom, I mean that the volume of my white blood cell count in my system was 0.1. The normal range starts at 4.16. So it was a far cry from that reality. And as a reminder, white blood cells are necessary for fighting off any potential bacteria or viruses or fungi. So you are just in an incredibly vulnerable state when you have 0.1 white blood cell count. The red blood cell count didn't plummet to the extreme lows that the others did, but I did reach a point where I was extremely fatigued and depleted. So they gave me blood transfusions, which were quite the joy because all of the oxygen in that fresh blood made me super energetic and very happy. So highly recommend blood transfusions. The platelets actually hold pretty steady. It's interesting to see that certain blood cells are more resilient to the high-dose chemotherapy than others, but it does plummet at a certain point and hits its low also on August 7th when it reaches 10 platelets per volume, and the normal range starts at 143. My mom had also reached this point where she was pretty much entirely depleted of platelets, and that's what allowed the subdermal hematoma to form, and the reason why her neurosurgeon would not allow the operation to continue until she had enough platelets to be able to recover properly after the operation. The complete annihilation of blood cells is the reason why the stem cell transplant is such a high-risk procedure, but it's also its methodology to ensure that there's no cancer cells lingering in the system. Because the idea is that getting rid of all the blood cells in the body means that you're getting rid of any trace of cancer cells that could then start replicating in the future. So it is your pathway to a permanent remission. But along that pathway, you're so vulnerable and exposed to anything going awry because you just have no protections left within you. I'll be releasing another video tomorrow, July 26th, to talk about when people debate whether or not they would go through cancer treatment despite never being diagnosed themselves. So hit subscribe, leave any questions in the comments, and I'll see you all tomorrow.